Hello, everybody. Now we are live and online to a session to question and answers. And I want to greet Professor Stuart Forsyth from Scotland and Dr. Ming Kui from Florida that will answer the questions you can send as indicated in the screen. I want to thank Nestlé Nutrition Institute for this kind invitation. And today, after the presentation, we have a lot of questions about the modern parenting and how can healthcare professionals manage this in these new times, especially with this COVID pandemic that change some practice for all professionals of health. We have here a lot of questions, and one of that is for me. One question, very interesting, is how parents tend to trust their family advice on how to raise their children. How improve trust between the healthcare professionals and the parents? Well, this is not a new question. First of all, we have to do a good relationship. The trust, the link we have between parents and even with relatives, grandfather, grandmother, is most important. And this begins for the pediatrician with a prenatal consultation. This is very interesting and is happening many times in my country, in Brazil, because today, with the internet, with the telemedicine, we have the occasion to improve this relationship before the delivery of the children. And of course, after that is important the commitment and responsibility of the professional to give all the assistance family needs. There is another question that is addressed to Dr. Ming Kui. And the answer is that parenting was never easy. How do you see parenting today different from the past? There is any difference? Today, we have more pressure on parents' increase in the last years. And you can explain this, what happens?
You are muted. Yeah.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, absolutely. Parenting have changed dramatically over time. During the old times, Greece and Rome, to Middle Age and Renaissance, all the way to the European colonial American, when there are only two life stages. There's a childhood and then there's adulthood. And childhood ended at age 5 to 7. And children are regarded as a cheap source of cheap labor. So parents' responsibility is limited, and children learn from observing their parents. And their parents, the priority is to survive, providing food and shelter. And over time, parenting has changed because of the resources. And now we're more focused on education. And parents invest heavily into education and forming intimate relationship with their child. And there's all kinds of parenting in terms of styles, from those very harsh physical punishment all the way to permissive parenting. And also with the diversity nowadays, there are families of divorce, there's single parent families, remarriage, step families, So what we can say now is we have more diversity in parenting. And now we also have increased pressure. On one hand is because the more resources, fewer children, parents are investing more on the fewer children, and they want them to succeed. And on the other hand, there's a social norm, of the intensive parenting. At the same time, there's a technology advancement that keeping parents closely connected with their children all the time. And also, at least in the US, over 50% of the parents, both parents work full-time, which means they have to juggle between family and work, the work-family balance. So we see an increase in parenting pressure, and that is definitely influencing children nowadays more.
Thank you, Ming. And there is another question that's addressed for me. Considering the digital world, the telemedicine, and the social restrictions due to COVID, do you see higher pressure for parents? Yes, this is a very important question in those days, because of course, they cannot have a face-to-face consultation. This is quite different as the usual, but the telemedicine, no doubt, and all the internet and the webinars, they help too much in those days, because the restriction will be not total. We can talk with parents, they can talk with the caregivers, give information, and many times it's not only the problems with your children, with feeding, but the emotional problems that we must lead in these days. And of course, there is a high pressure for the parents, for anxiety, for even social economics problems. And the telemedicine, it's a good way because it's cheap or free of charge. You can do it in anywhere, in any place. And this, of course, I think was a very good help in these days, very difficult days we live now. Well, there is a question to Professor Stewart. Professor, what do you think about the literature guideline is still focusing or targeting mothers as primary caregiver without acknowledging fathers as co-parents, single parents? What do you think about this?
Well, I think that, as Ming was saying, the diversity of parenthood has increased in recent times. I think that in many countries, the father is much more involved in the care of the child. In many ways, even changing nappies, feeding the child, and also supporting the household in general, as the mother, in many cases nowadays, has also got a job to do, as well as providing parenting duties. And so I think that in many countries, there has been an evolution towards both parents contributing to the care of the child, both parents contributing to the care of the house and doing the shopping and the other domestic duties that are required. And I think that is welcomed. I think that clearly this has not happened in all countries, but I think as these countries evolve into more modern day, higher economic countries, then these changes will happen there as well. So I think that I would certainly support both parents being actively involved. I think it's good for the child I think is good for the household in general.
Thank you, Stuart. Now there is a question to Dr. Mink. What do you think is the impact of the difficulties of being a parent today on the child? And I want to complement with your talk about hyper-parenting that you talk about with the father and the mother. What are the consequences on this?
Absolutely. Well, parents influence children in multiple ways. No one of them is from direct observing their parents. For example, facing difficulties, parents' drinking problems, drug problems, or their marital problems, parents, and then children can observe that, and that has a negative impact. A second way is the direct impact. For example, facing difficulties, parents practice hostile parenting, abusive parenting, neglectful parenting that directly impact children. And then there's the spillover hypothesis, which means when parents have emotional problems, physical problems, marital problems, the negativity can spill over to their parenting and parent-child relationship, which influence children. For example, the family stress model, especially during now the COVID, many families face economic hardship. And that hardship influence generate economic pressure. And that pressure will influence marital and parenting relationship, which ultimately influence child. And also, we can't overlook a child's problem that affect parenting, which is a reciprocal influence, and that create a negative cycle if parents have difficulties and child also have problems. And it's also worth noting that this relationship and difficulties are impacting children. They impact children of all developmental stages, not just infant, not just child, but also adolescents and young adults. In terms of hyperparenting, sometimes when parents overfunction, children underfunction. That means parents are doing everything and they prevent their children the opportunity to learn. Therefore, in terms of their self-efficacy, their confidence, their problem-solving abilities, as a result, all reduce. And that will pose problems for the child in the long term.
Yes, thank you, Meng. This is a problem, the hyper-parenting, even in all countries. There is a question to Stuart. How to better prepare future parents considering the pressures and frustrations of the world today?
Well, that's a good question. I think that parents are probably in many cases not prepared for parenthood. And when it happens, they find it extremely stressful. So I think it's really important that there is as good preparation as possible for them taking over the responsibility for a young child and continue to support that child throughout their life. I think that obviously extended family are very important in this. I think that young parents in particular are dependent upon their own parents to help them initially and to support them in terms of the feeding of the child and then the future care and supervision. I think that, again, it depends on the circumstances of the family in terms of the social circumstances, what are the needs of the family in general. And I think that if they're from a poor background, then I think social services and health services need to be closely involved to help them during the initial period of childhood and also as the child grows up in terms of their future education and future health. Clearly, also, there comes a time when they need to decide about employment of the father and employment of the mother. And I think that is also can be a difficult time for parents to decide how to approach this. I think today in many countries, as I said earlier, the mother is working, and in some cases she may also be the main income generator within the family. And so in those situations, the father has to take on more responsibility for the care of the child. And so there are a number of challenges which do need to be thought through. There also need to fall upon the support from, I say, extended family members, and also they may need to look at financial support in some families so that the child can be engaged in other child activities, which I think are very important for child development as well. And then, of course, in later life, or later childhood, there's new difficulties that may present in terms from a parenting point of view. And so I think one of the messages that parents need to recognize is that you're always a parent as long as you're alive. And therefore you will be involved in supporting your children throughout the time you are able to do so.
Thank you, Stuart. Very interesting. There is another question that's to me in the line of the internet again. And the question is, in the era of WhatsApp groups and social media, is it more challenging to have parents follow the guidance from healthcare professionals? This is a very interesting question because it's like a knife with two cut edge. You have a good size and not a so good size. For a good size for the mother is very interesting because all the mother, they want to be not a good mother, but an excellent mother, as Winnicott said. But the reality is different. And when mother come to the WhatsApp group with other mothers, she can see that the problems are not only problems with her child, but are common problems. And this, for the anxiety, can lower the level of anxiety. This is interesting. But in the other side, there is a problem because these groups, they have their own opinion, or each mother have opinion what to do with a problem with her child. For example, if have colics, I give this medication. If have some allergic problem, I give this formula. That in most cases is not appropriate for the individualized case of the child. And this, of course, must be filtered by the healthcare professional, by the pediatrician, by the dietitian, and this must be put in the truth. The social media is another kind of this kind of problem. Maybe could be a good information, maybe not, because many groups or something we can see in internet can be run by a society, a medical society with good answers, but many are not, are managed by not health professionals and can give a wrong information and even some fake news. That's a problem with internet. Internet is democratic, is international, is global, but we don't have regulation. We must filter all this information. And of course, another thing is how the professional is prepared to do. I grow in an analogic world, and now with the digital world, it's not easy to manage this. We must know some technical, we must know how to present, how to talk in internet, and this is a learning, a long learning that not had an end. There is another question to Dr. Ming. Is from Dr. Muhammad Javed from Pakistan, and is very interesting because he is asking about what the best age and way of parenting. This is there a best age to be a parent today? Because mothers are very small family, and mothers, they have most of them, they work a lot and do a career in the work, and is not, well, many years ago that two young women have a child. But now, how can you see this, the age and way of parenting in this modern time?
Yes. Well, it's rather hard to say. It depends on a lot of factors, not just the physical condition. We know that for younger age, for example, teenage pregnancy and childbirth and parenting, there are more problems because teenagers are children themselves. They haven't finished school, and most likely they're absent fathers, and they miss out on their own childhood, which we sometimes call it a truncated childhood. And they don't have the emotional maturity to take care of their child. And they may have to drop out of school, and they don't have that parenting experience that older mother have. And they don't have the economic stability. So a lot of problems associated with a teenage parent and teenage parenting. In early 20s, in terms of fertility, physically, there are fewer problems with pregnancy and childbirth. And women in early 20s are physically in prime. And when they have children, they're more likely to have more energy and play together. But at the same time, in today's society, being in early 20s, likely you have less resources. You're economically not well established. So, even though physically this is the prime, however, from a social, psychological perspective, this may be also, in my opinion, can be difficult because of the social, the economic factors. Late 20s to early 30s, this is the time when maturity level, the mature enough, relationship-wise, pretty stable. We know that the age of first marriage is in late 20s now. So there's a stable relationship. They're more economically established. And this could be the best time because physically, you still have the energy, and financially well-established, relationship-wise, relatively stable relationship. Above 40s, fertility reduce, energy level reduce, even though financially may be better off. So there's always a consideration of multiple factors. It's not really fixed. And also it depends on a lot of other factors. For example, do you have family support? Do you have your working place and support? Just like we said about, many parents now work full-time. And do you have the financial resilience? So a lot of factors can actually influence this and make some mothers, even in difficult times, and maybe resilient. So for example, teenage mothers, and we say that they face a lot of challenges, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're doomed, because if they have social support and if they can finish their education, we know that two factors that lead to successful later life is one is the economic establishment, and the second one is a stable, supportive relationship. So if the teenage mothers can get their education and can find a supportive partner, and they actually end very well. So it doesn't necessarily mean teenage mothers are doomed. However, depends on a lot of factors, and some mothers, despite the difficulties, can be very resilient. In terms of our best way to parenting, in my earlier talk, I mentioned about in a general rule, it is responsive, responsible parenting. However, there's no one best parenting practice. There's no one size fits all. And that's what's the key message from the parenting index, is that it influenced by a lot of factors from multiple levels, the macro level all the way to the micro level. So especially, in terms of in parenting realm, it depends on a lot of factors, and we say there is no one size fits all. But in general, the rule of thumb is to be responsible and responsive.
Thank you, Ming. Very interesting. There are a lot of questions. I want to join to Dr. Stewart. One of that's from Cedric Asani. He asks about, in the modern world we are living, families are now more nucleated. Father and mother and other relatives are not participate too much today in the family education and the child education or feeding. How then do we achieve the societal responsibility in parenting? And in complementation, is there any impact in the societal responsibility, of course, other than infant feeding, like policies and maternity leave parents face? What do you think about this, Stuart?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think it is an issue for parents. I think that the nuclear family is very small, tight family, and it can present difficulties. I think that, as we've already touched upon, parents today are more likely to be working and bringing an income to the family, so that offers benefits to the family as a whole. But it can interfere with what would in the past be normal parenting, where there's parents and there'd be grandparents available, etc. So I think that it is a problem, and the way today's parents appear to be helping to resolve that issue is that they are involving their very young children often in going to nurseries and to playgroups, so the children themselves are experiencing social behaviors of other children. They're in the company of other adults, and they're also to a certain extent receiving early education as well. So that is certainly one way that parents today have addressed the issue of them not always being available as their own parents may have been for them in the past. I think that in terms of the second part of your question, talking about other areas of supporting families, and the question included support for maternity leave, and of course nowadays in some countries the governments are offering paternity leave as well, and I think that is obviously of great benefit to the parents and to their children. One of the issues, of course, is that usually it is the mother who spends most time on leave, and that can have an impact on the mother's career and further training and education and promotion, for example. So that these are new challenges that the modern family need to face. So the family needs to balance, as I said, parents' ambitions, their career ambitions. It needs to balance income generation for the family, And of course, it then needs to, of course, balance the needs of their own children. And this can be challenging, but I think that the options are available in many countries. But of course, in many countries, these opportunities are not available. And that does lead to the questions of therefore there may be families who suffer from poverty because of lack of income coming into the family. And the poverty then presents other problems in relation to the health and well-being of children. So my answer is that yes, it is changing and will continue to evolve. And it's important that parents are given the best advice, that they make the best decisions for them as a family, but always, I think, putting the importance of the care and responsibility of their children to the center of the discussions.
Thank you, Stuart. There are three questions for me related to the internet, and they are very interesting. One of that is if we can recommend the use of social media as a way of educating modern parents. Another, what is the role of the healthcare professionals and including a dietitian, for example, in this prenatal consultation? Well, I think this, not this modern times, of course, no doubt that we have a very strong tool that is internet, the good information, the relationship with the healthcare professional, a pediatrician, a dietitian, and all the recommendation we can do to increase, to promote, for example, breastfeeding during pregnancy, some questions during lactation, and we have a simple, easy way to have a media communication that is very fast and easy in our screen. And this, of course, if we have a good use with the internet tool, I think this is very important. It's another media we have to education, of course, no limits to this. There is three questions to Dr. Ming, very interesting about the relatives. Do you think grandparents are not worthy to give adequate supplementary rights to new parents? This is the question of family trust from generation. This, I think, in all over the world, the trust in the grandparents and relatives is very important, but not always the right information. What do you think? How manage this, Ming?
Well, let me just say that grandparents play a very important role. They are very worthy. Financially, a lot of the grandparents can be able to help a lot. Instrumentally, they can help out. For example, when both parents are working, they can send their children, their grandparents can do some childcare responsibility. And children get a chance to have quality time with their grandparents, which is another very important aspect for child development. For grandparents, they get to spend time with their grandchildren. And however, they also have their own limitations, a physical limitation, maybe financially taking a toll. And also sometimes grandparents take on a major role. For example, when the parents are having some problems, for example, drug problems, or in prison, or the death of the parents, in that situation, sometimes grandparents, in order to want to keep their grandchildren, they would like to take on the parent role. So when grandparents sometimes can become the parents, of course, they lose their role as a grandparent. However, they take on the primary parenting role. And also, I would like to add that there is great cultural difference. In some countries, grandparents may be just weekend or during summer break or not taking on as an important role. However, in some countries, grandparents are very much involved. And in some places where grandparents have a very strong influence on how the parent should parent, and especially in cultures where there's a hierarchy that grandparents have high authority, and they not only are worthy, they're actually important, and they not actually just providing guidance, they're actually doing the actual parenting and helping with parenting with the instrumental help as well as financial help. So grandparents, very important. Depending on different situations, they can be the grandparents, they can be the parents, and there's great cultural variation.
Very nice, thank you. I'm happy we don't have enough time to other questions. I want to thank again the panelists, Professor Stuart Forsyth, Dr. Ming Kui, and a special acknowledgement to Nestlé Nutrition Institute for this very interesting panel, the presentation we have today. Have a good time and goodbye. Thank you for your presentation and thank you to watch this webinar.